Hi, this is Kyle Higgins from Hadrian's Wall, and you're entering the Fanbase.
Hello and welcome to episode 53 of the Fanbase Weekly podcast and our Season 3 premiere. For this show, we are joined by special guest Debbie Lynn Smith of Kymera Press, a publisher that focuses on female creators.
This week, we discuss the new trailer for Ant-Man and the Wasp, how Vertigo comics changed the comic industry, the alien viruses that could be littering our universe, and the Staunch Prize, which highlights crime fiction that forgoes violence against women. I hope that you got your space flu shot, because it's time to head inside the Fanbase.
7 days a week, it's the 365, it's the give you what you need at the. If you're along for the ride, you are now entering into the fan base. Comics and TV, geek news you need every day of the week. We're indie down to the long boxes, the tabletops is where we do battle ready or not, kid. To the trolls and the haters, we'd rather wait and see, cause I believe in Harvey Dent, it's the nerd in me. Cause I can't help but getting geeked out at cool stuff. 7 days a week, it's the 365, it's the give you what you need at the Fanbase Weekly.
Hello, listeners, and thank you for joining us for the Season 3 premiere of the Fanbase Weekly podcast. As always, I am joined by co-hosts Claire Thorne. Hello, Claire.
Hello.
Drew Siragusa. Hello, Drew.
Hello.
And Bryant Dillon. Hello, Bryant.
Welcome back, everyone.
Thank you. In addition, we are joined by special guest Debbie Lynn Smith, who is the founder of Kymera Press, as well as a TV and audio drama writer with such credits as Murder, She Wrote, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, and Touched by an Angel. Debbie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, for those who may be unfamiliar, what can you tell us about Kymera Press and what inspired you to launch this publishing company?
Well, Kymera Press is a comic book publishing company that supports women artists and writers in the comic book field. And basically, I had a pilot that I couldn't sell because Grimm got picked up at the same time.
Oh, I see.
And it was a little too similar to Grimm. Mm-hmm. So years later, I just decided to make it into a comic book. I thought it would lend itself well to that. Mm-hmm. And I started going to comic book conventions, and there weren't any women on the podiums. Mm-hmm. And I was just appalled by that. And I was appalled by it was the same thing as in television, the glass ceiling, very hard to break in, and women have to be better than men in order to break in. And I just decided I wanted to give a paying market for artists and writers, and give them a chance to get, professional credit, get their work out there, and maybe be stolen by some of the big companies. Little did I know that a lot of my artists have worked for DC and Marvel and IDW, and while they may pay a little bit better than we do, they really like our company quite a bit and working on our projects. So I've got great artists.
That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And as we mentioned in the introduction, your creative pursuits began well before Kymera, and you've worked in audio drama with Dark Shadows. You've worked in TV quite a bit. What inspired your love of writing, and where did your career begin when it came to writing?
I started writing when I was 8 years old, and I just took it for granted, I think. When I left home to become an actress. And I don't know why I didn't think about writing, which is something I'd always done. Mm-hmm. So I really didn't start taking my writing seriously until later. Mm-hmm. And I started with short stories, and I have short stories published as well, mostly in the horror genre.
Okay.
And then it was from that I got into television. Somebody had read some of my work and offered me a job as a writer's assistant on a television show. And that's how I learned to write scripts. And on my second job, I sold my first script, so that was great.
That's fantastic.
And then to get into the audio dramas, I actually worked for Dan Curtis, who was the creator of Dark Shadows. Mm-hmm. And Jim Pearson, who is the man who took care of all the Dark Shadows aspects of things, called me one day and asked me if I'd be interested in writing an audio drama, and I said, "Are you kidding?" So yes, I've written 3 audio dramas from Big Finish.
That's fantastic. Do you find that you enjoy adapting or transitioning your writing from one medium to another, or does that become a challenging thing, or do you prefer to stick within the TV and comic book mediums when it comes to writing?
No, I like doing all kinds of writing, but it's a challenge because each form of writing takes its own craft.
Right.
Before I wrote my comic book, Gates of Midnight, I took a year to study the form. And I mean reading books, taking seminars, reading comics, going to conventions. Just
really tough research.
I know. It was really hard.
Exhausting.
And it was funny because, you know, comic books when I was a kid, because remember I watched the original Dark Shadows.
Sure, yeah.
When I was a kid is the time that you can hear about when you're going through the history, and we'll talk about Vertigo, when, you know, when comic book lost their female readers. And they lost me. And so when it was suggested to me to turn Gates into a comic book, I was like, oh, I don't know. And I went to my local comic book store in Las Vegas, and Ralph, the owner of Alternate Reality Comics, I'm going to give him a plug, is so knowledgeable. And I just went to him and said, hey, I've been asked to write a comic book, don't know much about it, can you turn me on to... He turned me on to Saga. He turned me on to Why the Last Man. You know, I mean, he just turned me on to these, and I was reading these things and I going, these aren't my childhood comic books.
No.
So I just became a huge fan again. You know, so I was like, okay, I want to try this. This is really good.
Yeah, it's a real breeding ground for original storytelling, and people don't always realize that the superhero aspect overshadows so much.
Right, and I don't read any of the superhero. Well, I guess it's not true because I do. I did read the Wonder Woman Bionic Woman mashup.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And I would love that. But that's about the only real super, you know, hero one. Squirrel Girl.
Yeah.
You
I was
know,
just
I
going
love
to say,
Squirrel
you
Girl.
sound like a good candidate for Squirrel Girl.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously.
That's a fun one.
Been there, done.
Well, speaking of comics, what can you tell us about the titles within the Kymera Press umbrella, as it were?
Well, we have 5 titles now, I'm proud to say. I write Gates of Midnight, which is basically about Raven, who just returned from Afghanistan, where she was a combat medic, and she's suffering from PTSD. Discovers she has to fight monsters on the streets of New York.
Oh boy.
And it explores, who are the monsters, them or us? You know.
Yeah.
And then we have, that's the dark fantasy one, because that's where I live.
Sure.
We have Pet Noir, which is based on a collection of short stories by Patty Nagel. And this is about Leon. He's a genetically engineered cat who's an undercover cop on a space station.
Like you do.
You know, it's reality based.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Slice of life.
We have Dragons by the Yard, which is about a woman who loves to sew dragons and that kind of thing, and this mysterious woman comes along and gives her special fabric, and she gets a little bit more than she bargains for when she sews up her dragons.
Cool.
Then we have Mary Shelley Presents, and we just brought that one out for the 200th anniversary of Frankenstein.
Okay.
And we didn't want to do another Frankenstein thing, so we did Mary Shelley Presents, and we're doing Victorian horror writers, female horror writers.
Okay.
Short stories. So the first one was Elizabeth Gaskell's, and we adapted it, The Old Nurse's Story. And what we've done is adapted the short story and then put the short story behind the comic so that you can kind of compare the two if you'd like.
Wow.
And Nancy Holder is writing that, and she is...
From Buffy fame, I believe.
Yes,
and-
we're
Yeah.
Buffy fans.
Yeah, that's right.
Quite a
Exactly.
bit, yeah.
Yeah, she's won all kinds of Bram Stoker awards for her horror. She's got the media tie-in. She did the Wonder Woman tie-in.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, and she's a New York Times best-selling author.
Oh, yeah.
And she does comics. She's written comics before, so that's really great. And then finally we have, we're just bringing out, it's called Ivory Ghost, and this is our reality-based one. It's based on a novel by Caitlin O'Connell. She is a scientist who has worked over in Africa with the elephants, and it's a mystery set against the ivory poaching.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And to me, it's not issue oriented, but it really talks about, I think, a serious issue, especially with Trump lifting the ban on
yes.
ivory and then putting it back on. Thank God. But that doesn't mean he won't lift it in the future. So.
Tomorrow.
Exactly.
Yes.
Whenever, one of his family members wants to go poaching.
That's right.
Basically.
Oh, boy.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your slate of publications with us. When we come to the end of the show, we're going to talk about where our listeners can find Kymera Press, where we can find you at upcoming conventions, as well as where we can find you on social media. So we'll be doing that. Before we transition to our next segment, as we have been lauding through social media, I have a bit of an announcement to make. Here at Fanbase Press, it is our mission to celebrate fandoms and create new ones, which is why on every episode of the Fanbase Weekly, as Claire can attest to, we share what we are a fan of each week.
Not enough. We don't get to share enough. That's true. Fan of.
Claire wishes that was the entire episode.
She wishes that was the name of the podcast.
I could do that. I could do that.
But before we delve into what our picks are for this week, I wanted to let our listeners know that you can now call in and let us know what you are a fan of each week. As a new feature of the podcast, listeners can call into the official Fanbase Weekly call-in line and leave us a message. Feel free to share what you are a fan of this week, or share any questions, comments, concerns, and all other geeky inquiries, which will be shared on the following week's episode. So, without further ado, please feel free to call in to 818-208-7379. Again, that's 818-208-7379. We will, of course, repeat that on all of our episodes moving forward, but we look very much forward to hearing from you.
You want to request that Drew answer your question via Twitter.
Through Twitter. Yes. Do it.
Not going to happen. All right.
Well, let us determine what everyone is a fan of this week. Drew, why
Yes.
don't you start us off?
Yesterday I finally did my first escape room, and it was called the Wizard's Tower. It's a company called Maze Rooms that's all around LA.
Okay.
And this one was, you had to get all the ingredients together to make the Eternal Life elixir, whatever, and it was a lot of fun. We got out with 1 minute to spare.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Nicely done.
We're glad
sir.
you survived that.
Yeah.
Otherwise you wouldn't be here
Yeah.
right now.
That's
That's
true.
good.
You may still be locked in the room.
Yeah.
Where's Drew?
Couldn't escape.
Debbie, what about you? What are you a fan of this week?
This week I'm a fan of Downton Abbey. I didn't watch it when it first aired, and I've been binge watching it, and I'm totally
You're hooked.
Who's your favorite character? I just need to know.
Mary.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, she's delightful.
I really like her because she's hard on the surface and
Yeah.
soft underneath.
Michelle Dockery? Is that... Her last name's Dockery. Anyway.
We have not started this, so we can't
Yeah.
answer any of your
That's good
questions.
stuff. Anyway. All right. Answered my question.
Claire,
Yes.
what are you a fan of this week?
This week I am a fan of the latest, or one of the latest photos that NASA's released from Curiosity on Mars. It is a phenomenal composite panorama from its current position in the Gale crater. And I'm going to point people to the Washington Post article about this, which is called Curiosity's 5-Year Journey Across Mars in One Stunning Photo. So you can go to the Washington Post and look at that article. They've got a couple minutes video on there that shows this panorama view, and then towards the end of it, they kind of trace out, and one of the really amazing things about the photos, you can kind of trace out Curiosity's full journey into this crater from its landing spot to where it is now over a 5-year trek, and it's
so cool.
It's just so cool because it really does look like a video that your grandfather took, you know, out of Palm Desert or something. You know, it just looks like right next door. It's amazing.
You're going to start some conspiracy rumors with that one.
But you know,
I heard your grandfather out in the desert was the one that actually filmed that.
I know. Well,
Palm Desert, right?
That and people still can't figure out the logistics of how Curiosity does those selfies. Where it looks like there's like a drone over its head because they just composite out the little arm that's holding the camera, but that's too much for
its
people
own selfie
to
stick.
Figure out.
That would be awesome because the selfie stick. They're like, we made sure to include that.
You see the shadow of the tour bus behind. Anyway, that's what I'm a fan of this week.
Wonderful.
And all weeks.
Yay. Bryant, what are you a fan of this week?
I'm a fan of something that I've been a fan of before. This is the Perfect Organism podcast. It's an alien-focused podcast following the fandom based on the franchise Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, and more. They had a recent release where they have an interview with Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff Jr., who now run Amalgamated Dynamics Incorporated. They're a huge effects house and I believe a production studio as well. I think they're getting into their own films. But if you don't know them, these two individuals worked for Stan Winston during Aliens. They ended up taking over the alien effects for Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, a few of the other films. And their interview is really interesting because they spend less time on exactly how they made these effects and how they're created, and more on sort of their interpretations or experiences on the various Alien films. And it's really interesting perspective. I don't think we've heard them talk this freely about a lot of these experiences in a long time. So if you want to check that out, you can find the Perfect Organism podcast on iTunes and Facebook as well.
Can I mention what my husband's a fan of? Because I might not get to go home. He's a fan of the new trailer for the movie Solo, which he has not watched yet.
Man.
So there's that.
I appreciate that about you, Chris Thorne. Lastly, I am a fan of the show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. This entire season has been truly remarkable.
I'm a couple weeks behind, but it's been really good this season. It's the Guardians of the Galaxy season is really what it is.
That's fair.
And I say that as a compliment.
Sure. Yeah. The writing, the plot line just has been truly phenomenal. Both in the previous season and in this one, it's really just been such a joy to follow episode to episode. So if you perhaps lost the show a few seasons back, I would highly encourage you. I think it was the 3rd season you can probably skip. But head on over.
Last season?
The one before.
Because I liked last season.
Season 4 was pretty good too. Yeah.
Start with season 4, and then you will highly enjoy season 5. So definitely recommended. But on that note, we are going to take a brief break. After this message, we will return with the first story for season 3 of the Fanbase Weekly. We'll be right back.
Well, hello there, Fanbase Press listeners. My name is Paul Packler. And have I got 3 rhetorical questions. Do you love the 80s? How's about Michael J. Fox? And also, Michael J. Fox? Well, have we got just the thing for you. The awesomest podcast on the Fanbase Press Network. Quality Time with Family Ties. Echo, echo, echo. Join me, my best friend Corey Pepper, and our really good acquaintance Scott Jones as we watch and review each and every episode of Family Ties, the sitcom that made Michael J. Fox a star. And unlike all the other Family Ties review podcasts, Quality Time with Family Ties digs deep with our analysis, performances, politics, the symbolism of the Keatons' obsession with orange juice, and whether or not Scott should get a doctor to check out that cough. Fanbase Press brings you a new episode of Quality Time with Family Ties every Thursday, so be sure to look for us on fanbasepress.com. We're located under the audio tab. And then, if you don't want to do that, subscribe to us on iTunes, and please rate and review us. We'll love you for 1,000,000 years, or maybe We'll love you for a million more. Quality time with family ties on Fanbase Press. Bye! Sha-la-la-la.
Welcome back. Our first story for this season comes from Looper, which dissects the new trailer for Ant-Man and the Wasp. Some of the things we have to look forward to are a new winged ant for Scott to ride, a glimpse at some of the new characters, a Fantastic Voyage-esque microscopic journey, and the return of Giant Man. In addition to seeing Hope Van Dyne in action as the Wasp, we got our first glimpse at the villain Ghost, who is changed to female in the MCU, and Bill Foster, who took over the mantle of Giant Man in the comics. Unfortunately, the trailer did not show us the original Wasp, Janet Pym, or Sonny Birch, one of the film's potential villains. So, panel, did you enjoy the trailer, and what moments stood out for you?
I have to ask a question. I thought the original Wasp was Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yes, she's playing
Okay.
she's Janet Pym. Yeah. Yes, that's what I'm saying. We
but
didn't
it
see her in the
did-
trailer.
You did see Michelle Pfeiffer in the trailer, though.
Did we?
No.
Was she in
If
it?
I missed Michelle Pfeiffer in the
Oh,
trailer.
okay. Maybe
I would
it
be-
was because it was on the article you sent me.
Oh.
Her picture?
They mentioned her in the article. I don't know if she was actually in the trailer. I'd have to watch it again.
I
I've
don't
only
think she
seen
was
it
actually
once.
in the trailer. They
I know
probably did talk about
there have
her,
been
though.
pictures of her.
Yeah.
And-
She'd probably, seeing her visually
Yeah.
in the trailer would probably be a really big reveal,
yeah.
because I'm kind of assuming maybe that's a major plot point.
Well, it has to be, because she's trapped in the quantum realm. So, obviously, a lot of this movie is going to be them trying to rescue her.
Although I did hold my breath for her,
Yeah.
just in case.
I think Debbie, that you're right, that the article did mention Michelle Pfeiffer in that, and I think that the article shows a picture of a ship within that quantum realm. With all of the
Well, that's
molecules
not
around.
technically that's still bigger than the quantum realm. So
Okay.
that's where they're saying it's the microscopic.
It
So
looks
it's going to be on their way
It
down.
looks like the viral realm, maybe.
Yeah, well, that was retardagars. So those are
Yeah,
microscopic
that's
organisms. Quantum realm is even smaller than that.
But I wonder,
Yes.
I think that's the big,
Yes.
probably the big
How they're
reveal
gonna-
of how, is she still there? How will they get her out of there? I
Yeah.
think that'll be the
Well,
interesting
if you, not
If
that
they
this
get
does
her out.
Have
anything.
an actress playing her, then I mean, she's still there.
Yes, she's clearly going to return.
Oh,
thing.
you're
Yes,
not going
definitely.
to
Yes.
waste Michelle Pfeiffer.
No.
No,
You better not.
I was so thrilled when I saw Michelle Pfeiffer
Yes.
was going to.
I feel like this trailer feels a lot like the first Ant-Man trailer, where it's like the trailer for me, at least for me personally, it's enjoyable. It doesn't like grab me intensely, but I have every faith with Marvel Studios. I'm going to go to this movie. I'm going to love it.
Yeah.
It's going to have huge surprises. It's going to have great characters. You know.
And I'm glad, like, you watch this trailer and you have no idea what the plot's really about.
Right.
You know, I'm glad that they're not giving you the whole plot. And it's like, we're already going to see this movie. You don't need to tell us everything that's going to happen in the
Right.
trailer.
Yeah, well, I don't think they did that with the first movie.
No,
either.
but I'm glad they're getting to the point in the Marvel movies. They're like, we know you're going to see this.
You're invested.
This is the visuals you're going to see.
Clearly, they recognize what really made the Ant-Man, what made Ant-Man for me so successful was less about the particulars of the plot, which was still very
Yeah.
engaging, but more about how successfully they kind of married up character development. It was really good character development, but then they married it up with just this very knowledgeable and skillful, like tongue-in-cheek look at these superpowers that are involved in this movie,
And
blended
superhero
it
movies
with-
in general. Like having a fight on a kid's train instead of an
my
actual
God.
train, kind of,
Yeah,
you know.
and they were able to poke fun at so many superhero and action movie tropes, while at the same time doing it in a way where they're like, oh, we love all of these
Yeah.
things, but they're kind of ridiculous, and I think the trailer does that very much. I mean, you don't
Yeah.
throw a Hello Kitty pet
No.
on the back of a car during a car chase without some level of just tongue-in-cheek glee.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I am really glad that this clearly set up, this is going to deal with the consequences of Civil War. I'm glad, like, they don't have a movie like Civil War and then we're just going to move on. It's, no, we've got to deal with the aftermath of that.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
and clearly he is acknowledging maybe he didn't make the
Yeah.
greatest choice going there and getting arrested, and Okay, so I have a question.
Yes.
Goliath, or Bill Foster, played by Lawrence Fishburne. So does this mean that somewhere in this movie I'm going to get to see a skyscraper-sized Lawrence Fishburne?
Potentially.
Potentially. And that's the, like, in this
I don't know
article it
this
was saying it's possible that he helped them in, like, the Cold War era, and this is after it, so maybe we'll see, I feel like we're gonna see flashbacks of
Michelle
Hank
Pfeiffer.
and Janet, which I really, really, really hope in that flashback we see, them start the Avengers Initiative and Janet named them. In the comics, she's the one that named the Avengers. So if we have that, like, and bring back Peggy Carter and Howard Stark and...
Well, they had them in the first one. It wouldn't be unreasonable, and especially because Stark and Pym were sort of at odds.
Yeah.
One question I have is, and I know we have storytellers and story watchers here, everyone. Are we going to... We know that Michelle Pfeiffer is playing this character. We know she's going to return. We also know that we're going to get the version of, like, the Wasp version, 2.0. Yes, thank you, Barbara, for helping me with that. Do we think that this is a situation where... Are we in some ways being telegraphed that we're going to lose the Michelle Pfeiffer character at the end of this movie? That she's going to sacrifice herself?
I would say I think it's more likely that we're going to lose Hank than Janet.
Let's give over to Debbie. Debbie, what are your thoughts? As a storyteller, what would you do in this position? Would you bring back this character only to lose her at the end of the film?
Michelle Pfeiffer?
No. That is the correct answer.
If Michelle Pfeiffer is playing her, no.
Look your audience in the eye and kill Michelle Pfeiffer.
I mean, but that is the big thing with writers. It's to kill your darlings.
Sure.
You know, and be really terrible to your characters because that's what makes a story.
I know.
And so...
It's going to be really sad if that's the case.
Well, and we didn't see Michelle Pfeiffer and we didn't see Walton Goggins either, which is another casting, like, just bonanza because he's amazing and everything as well.
Yeah, they're bringing a great cast, a great new cast into this already very well cast film.
Along those lines, I was very excited because a friend of mine was in the trailer. Named Brian Lugo. There's a shot where there's 3 cops holding their guns at the screen. He's the middle one.
Oh, nice.
I thought you were going to say my pet aunt.
No. He was also in Supergirl. He was the one that when she lost her powers, he was like the thug that she talked down. And I was like, oh, he's in the trailer. So that was very exciting.
Congrats to him.
Yeah.
Very cool. I know I've talked a lot about the Hello Kitty Pez dispenser, but the moment in the trailer that made me go, oh, hell yeah, was when he shrinks the building and then
that is the best moment. That is my favorite.
Because he designed a building with a handle in it. I mean, it was great.
It's very much like the tank.
I like that the MCU Hank is like, no, I've got contingencies. I've got a plan for everything. This whole building is just a ruse.
Well, there's a juxtaposition there too of how freaked out Hank is about the technology and how dangerous it is in the world, and yet the glee to which he designs these things that he can personally use.
Yes.
Like,
no one else can use it, but he can.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So anything else you guys are looking forward to, or that's about it?
Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yeah?
Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yeah, Michelle Pfeiffer.
Definitely.
Okay. Isn't that amazing that we can all be in such agreement that, like, one character and one actress is so phenomenal that we're just so looking forward to her being part of this movie? I'm so excited about that.
Can we just talk about Michelle Pfeiffer this episode just the whole time?
Very much akin, I think, to the feelings of Black Panther, where you're just like, let's see it.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that agreed note, we'll have to wait and see Ant-Man and the Wasp when it comes out this summer, and we'll be back after this message.
Hi, this is Barbra with Fanbase Press. As you may know, Fanbase Press is a publisher of comic books, graphic novels, and other fine media. And we're overjoyed to announce the newest addition to our publishing slate with Kymera, a 15-issue bilingual creator-owned comic book series that follows a year in the life of Lupe, a 15-year-old girl who discovers that her quinceañera brings with it a super cool party and superpowers. In Kymera, Lupe is just your average, insecure, well-meaning, occasionally cranky teenage girl whose life is completely turned upside down when she discovers she has superpowers. Her Kymera powers only last as long as she's 15, so over the course of this roller coaster year, we follow the adventures of Lupe as she figures out what it really means to be a hero. David Pepos of Newsarama says, engagingly written and impeccably illustrated, Kymera is a delightful coming-of-age story that juggles teenage drama and superheroic action without skipping a beat. Help to support the giveaways, podcasts, and other free content we provide every day here at Fanbase Press by purchasing your copy of Kymera or one of our other awesome graphic novels in the Fanbase Press online store. Visit fanbasepress.com today and click on the shop link to get your hands on some of the most original and entertaining indie comics on the market.
Welcome back to the Fanbase Weekly. Next up, we take a look back at Vertigo, the mature reader's imprint of DC Entertainment and its impact on the comic industry. Vulture's recent piece on How Vertigo Changed Comics Forever, written by Abraham Reisman, details the founding and rise of the bold and cutting-edge DC imprint under the leadership of editor Karen Berger. Long known for the high quality of its titles, Vertigo is the publisher of books like 100 Bullets, Preacher, Why the Last Man, Sandman, Hellblazer, and many, many more. In addition, Vertigo has been the home of a ridiculous impressive amount of talent, including names like Alan Moore, Darwin Cook, Gilbert Hernandez, Neil Gaiman, Brian K. Vaughan, Garth Ennis, Grant Morrison, and many more as well. Reisman's piece goes on to describe how Vertigo has managed for years to thrill teen audiences without alienating adults, how it paid homage to classic creators and creations while showcasing new talent, and the way it rewarded its creators by enabling writers and artists who invented entirely new characters under the Vertigo banner to retain full rights to them and their stories, something fairly unheard of when it comes to Marvel and DC Comics. As Reisman explains, Berger left Vertigo in 2013 and is now working with Dark Horse Comics, publishing a specific line of titles under the banner Berger Books. Shelley Bond served as Berger's successor at Vertigo, but in 2016 she was forced out, and according to Reisman, the flow of Vertigo titles has now slowed to a trickle and is holding place until an upcoming relaunch of the imprint. So panel, how familiar were you with Vertigo? How would you describe their importance in the comic book industry, and are there any Vertigo books you'd recommend our listeners check out?
Well, for me, it was entirely secondary. I wasn't really, and haven't necessarily been really aware of Vertigo as an entity in and of itself, but Why the Last Man is arguably my entry point into comic book reading. And it was, I'd kind of dabbled here and there with it, but it was the first story I read that sucked me in from cover to cover and introduced for me the fact that graphic novels, comic book storytelling can be something that is broader than the scope of superhero plot lines, which have never really appealed to me personally, but this was this just epic story with such a broad cast of characters. There's a monkey in a diaper the whole way. I mean, it's
ampersand.
I love ampersand, but it was, and you move on. That took me from there to titles like Saga, and but it was the first time I really just kind of experienced that. I just didn't know comics could be that way. So
I had the exact same reaction, and it was like, to me, very fresh kind of story. I hadn't even read that in novels or short stories or anything like that, so it was really fun. I mean, it was just really fun, and it pulled me along. Like you said, I went from graphic novel to graphic novel because I came to it later.
I had a very similar experience. I was already in comics, but I sort of drifted away between, I would say, high school and the first couple of years of college. I just got busy. The local comic book shop in Pittsburgh that I moved to just didn't seem to be updating their new issues correctly, so I couldn't keep up with titles, and I just kind of drifted away. And I had a friend of mine who was really into comics sit me down with Preacher, which is a title I was familiar with going in the comic book shop, but had really no idea what it was. And I basically devoured it during sitting in a dressing room during I think a summer stock show, and just like blew through every volume that he had till I got to the end, and started giving it to people like Barbra and my friends, and be like, you have to read this. And it continues to be my favorite comic of all time. I feel like there's so much to be found in Preacher that just touches on so many things, like it's so many great themes, everything from being an American to the themes of religion and how religious hypocrisy and all sorts of stuff. But one thing I think is there has to be so much credit given to Karen Berger in regards to how much she shaped this. And touching on a story we're going to discuss next, one thing I really applaud her for is Vertigo was never afraid to touch on incredibly difficult topics and subjects. Violence was extreme at times, but I can't think of a title that I would describe as salacious in Vertigo. Everything had a real purpose to it. Even Why the Last Man has some horrific violence in it, some really difficult subjects explored, but it never feels exploitive. And I think that's one of the really important things.
And one of, because I, like you mentioned, Bryant, I started with Preacher, which violence is
ridiculous. It's Garth Ennis.
Paramount to the story.
If you know Ennis,
But another one that I think uses violence to tell such a beautiful story and with such a powerful message is Pride of Baghdad, which was also another Vertigo book. And Brian K. Vaughan, who, as we talked about, incredible writer, but it had such an amazing message to it and such a unique way of telling that story. So I really do, I agree. I echo all of your sentiments for Karen Berger, and I'm so excited to see what she's doing now with Berger Books. I know Matahari is a new series, I believe 5-issue series that they're releasing.
It's their first release through that, right? It
is, and it's somewhat of a historical fiction about a courtesan who was killed, I believe. I can't remember the time period right now, but really kind of paved the way for women's rights at the time. And it's such a beautiful comic series. Thus far, they've released the first issue, so it's currently out for pre-order. You can actually read a review of it on the Fanbase Press website at this time.
Review, huh?
An advanced
Look at
review.
You getting advanced reviews.
Look at that. That's how we roll here.
Karen Berger. Whoa.
That's how we roll here at Fanbase Press. But I believe it's still available for pre-order. The final order cutoff for pre-orders has passed, but please go to your local comic book store. You can tell your comic shop that you want to put it on your pull list. But it's a great indication, I think, of the start of the kinds of stories that Karen Berger, through Berger Books and through Dark Horse, will be telling. So I think there's a lot
it's really
to see.
interesting because, some of the younger than me women who are friends of mine, huge fans of Sandman.
That for me was the Vertigo. Yeah,
I'm not going to talk because I can't talk about it. I haven't read it. I knew Neil Gaiman back at the beginning of that because I hung out with friends of his.
Okay.
So I knew Neil before he was Neil.
Sure.
I don't know him anymore because he's Neil. But I think that what Karen Berger is doing is she has a sensibility of what women will read. And it's not shying away from the violence, but as you said, it's not exploitative. It's not the girl in the refrigerator.
Right.
That sort of thing.
For me, and like I was saying, like Sandman was my big journey through Vertigo. I don't know the other ones as well, but that is one that is so often someone's like, oh, I don't want to read comics because I don't like superheroes, and that's the first one everyone goes, read this one then. What's interesting is I kind of started at it where it would be random trade paperbacks that I would read, like people would give them to me, which is fine because each arc kind of has their own story, but it doesn't really mean as much as if you start from the beginning and you realize how it's all interconnected and everything. And he shows up and he deals with Batman and Constantine. And, it's interesting that that's going on above what's going on with the Justice League, and they're connected, but not. Yeah.
Well, and also, like, one thing that I would go back to is Claire's statement, and I think everyone agreed when you said this, but these comics are all, whether we're talking about Sandman, Preacher, Why the Last Man, they are comics that continuously what you hear is, I didn't know that a comic could be like this. You have a moment where you flip a page, and a moment hits you, and you're like, this is hitting me the way the most emotionally affecting movie or novel or anything else that I've experienced is hitting me.
Well, and I think it's because it was boundaryless storytelling in a responsible way. It wasn't, it took what people expected and maybe probably wrongly assumed that comic book stories were supposed to be, and said, yeah, no, it's all of the other things. And I think you see that in other, mainstream, I guess might be the right word for it, but you see that is embraced now in other mainstream titles.
Sure, yeah.
And I think it's responsible for the fact that I can enjoy titles like Bitch Planet and Sex Criminals and, just a myriad of other adult topic graphic novels and series that tackle really, really interesting storylines.
And that's not just what Vertigo put out, but then what it knocked down the door for, like, when you think of, like, Wildstorm was their, like, next one, and that did, like, The Authority, which we wouldn't have had without Vertigo.
Right, which, like, I don't think you would have had a series like the Vision series, which is this just searing look at the dysfunctional inner workings of a superhero and his family, kind of behind the scenes of the normal superhero kind of story that you might have. It's fascinating.
It really is. We have reached our time limit on this subject, but we definitely encourage anyone who's listening, if you have not checked out any of these books or Vertigo as a company, and you are a comic fan or not a comic fan, it's definitely the place to start, and can't recommend it enough. So we'll take a short break, and we will be back with our next story.
Hi, my name is Joe Hogan, and I'm a geek. And if you're currently listening to this, there's a good chance you're a geek too. So check out my podcast, Geektitude. Each week, I talk with somebody about their geek aptitude. Sometimes I talk to people in a geeky profession. Sometimes it's someone doing something really cool with their geekiness. Often it's another geeky podcaster. But it's always someone who wants to share their inner geek. So join me each week as we come together to geek out about all the geeky stuff we love. And remember, this week, keep it geek.
Welcome back to the Fanbase Weekly podcast. Our next story comes from Gizmodo.com and talks about why scientists are not looking hard enough for viruses that exist within our solar system and beyond. According to an article published in the science journal Astrobiology and led by Portland State University scientist Kenneth Stedman, the scarce knowledge about and search for viruses outside of our planet is detrimental to our overall search for other forms of life. Stedman, who in 2012 discovered a completely new group of viruses capable of living in acidic hot lakes, demonstrated the extreme conditions under which viruses can evolve, live, and even thrive. He also believes the viruses will likely be the first sign of life that NASA will likely find on other planets and moons, providing a scientific edge for those astrobiologists already in search of alien life. So, what say you, panel? Should astrovirology, as Stedman calls it, be integrated into the search for alien life, and why do you feel that it has not already been done so?
Well, given the X-Files, I don't know, because, like, what the heck, guys? Or Andromeda Strain. No, I mean, this is a really compelling argument this whole article makes and this individual makes, and one interesting thing that it got me thinking about is I remember I believe in high school or middle school, there was some discussion in a science class about how viruses really walk the line in being living organisms. I mean, they act like no other organism that we know. They almost operate more like a machine. A machine, yeah. And
well, and they go in, they imprint, they change things so that they can adapt.
Well, and they don't really have a purpose beyond that, you know. It's not like most living organisms have a life cycle or something, and viruses have that to a degree, but they only have that desire to replicate and change, as you were saying, Claire. And so one additional idea that's really, I guess, interesting and supposed by things like the X-Files is where did viruses come from, and were they created by something, you know?
Well, actually, what I'm saying is all viruses are alien viruses. You know, I mean, where did they come from?
I do appreciate the fact that we're discussing this story right in the height of this year's flu season.
I know, seriously.
Yes.
And the CDC is now, apparently in a funding crisis.
The CDC in a funding crisis, and I just finished watching all 5 seasons of Fringe as well. So I
just read a book called Station 11, and it's about a flu that... Did you read
that?
I read that.
Yeah,
it's
Thank
the
you for
apocalypse.
reminding me of that.
I read it during this flu season.
Oh, no.
So, I mean, I was like, okay.
Well, it's interesting to me, especially in light of years past where we've talked about different kinds of alien life, that it's not necessarily... I don't know what that noise is.
There's a weird, hunting...
Terrifying.
They're coming after us for talking about the alien virus.
Am I hearing a soundtrack?
Screeching in the next room. We're not paranoid at all.
It's interesting that in years past on the podcast, we have talked about that not all forms of life that we are in search of necessarily need to be carbon-based, that we can look at things through other elements. But it does boggle the mind a little bit that if there are astrobiologists who are currently looking for signs of alien life, that's not necessarily that there would need to be another subset of scientists specifically for viruses, but you would think that there would be testing that would involve all kinds of life, viruses included, and not just...
Especially the most resilient.
Right.
One of the problems with that is we don't know how they function. Like, if they're not carbon-based, we don't know what we're looking for. You know what I mean? So you kind of are just like, we're looking for everything.
Right.
And that's one of the things with space exploration and everything, is we're focusing on similarities to life on Earth, because we know that's possible. Right. You know what I mean? Like, whereas we're looking for everything, but you can only focus on so much.
Right.
And that's also a good point, which, everyone's kind of getting a little paranoid with the virus. But, I mean, potentially, it may not even be compatible with us. Like, there could be viruses that can't even, life on another planet, even if it's sentient life, could be not compatible with us.
Well, and the interesting concept that you bring up, Drew, about like our perception and how it limits us is really part of the reason for me, as I'm such a huge fan of the Alien series, because that first movie, their goal was really to make you feel like, something truly alien was there that you couldn't completely comprehend and didn't quite understand, and it did infect you, which was a terrifying concept. And
to a certain extent, you infect them too, because their biology is changed by the host, and
there's a genetic meld to a degree, and I think that not only are those thoughts as a human terrifying, but it is like I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson say some sort of quote about how like what we think of like when we think about aliens, that's a reflection on what we are, because we can't really conceive what an alien would even be. Right. We're so based on what we know of life.
We can't even. I mean, there are parallels to be drawn between the fact that we can't even adequately describe what's in our own ocean.
Right.
Yeah. We have discovered a shockingly low percentage of what we know to be in the ocean, and then we kind of have this unrealistic idea of what we think we understand the world and the universe to be, when really it should just be kind of mind-boggling how little we know and how small the scope of our understanding is about, and how large I think the possibility of just different kinds of life forms all throughout our universe, and just our galaxy would be. Fringe season 6 thing.
Well, we will certainly learn more, and especially as we continue to research Mars and learn more about what's going on there. Hopefully that will yield some results as well. Certainly this will not be the last time that we talk about space nor viruses on this podcast.
I have anything to say about it.
Exactly. We are going to take a brief break. We will return with our final story for this week's episode. We'll be right back.
Hey there, listeners. This is Bryant Dillon from Fanbase Press, and I'm here to let you know that in addition to our podcast and website, Fanbase Press is also a publisher of comic books, graphic novels, and other fine media. The Gamma Gals is an exciting and action-packed trade paperback from Fanbase Press and tells the story of 3 RPG-loving teenage girls who awaken from a gamma-irradiated storm to discover they have extraordinary superpowers and must protect their city from countless supervillains, monsters, and more. Created, written, and illustrated by newcomer Stefano Terry, The Gamma Gals features a diverse cast of characters that aims to show all readers that everyone can be a superhero. AdventureAmigos.net says, The Gamma Gals is not only a win for creator Stefano Terry and publisher Fanbase Press, but is a huge win for its readers. Visit Fanbase Press today and click on the store link to purchase your own copy of The Gamma Gals or one of our other awesome graphic novels.
Welcome back. You're still with us, the Fanbase Weekly.
Yes.
So if you got scared off by viruses, we're glad you came back.
Should have saved that for last.
Everyone survived the break.
We've all survived. This week, our final story is from an editorial posted on theguardian.com by Sophie Hannah, who expressed her opinion about the recently announced Staunch Prize. By way of background, the Staunch Prize was founded by author and screenwriter Bridget Lawless. The prize will open to entries next month, with the winner to be announced this coming November to coincide with the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Sounds like a very nice day. The Staunch Prize will be awarded to the author of a novel in the thriller genre in which no woman is beaten, stalked, sexually exploited, raped, or murdered. Hannah states her position that while the prize has good intentions and wishes to take an important stand against violence towards women, the focus should perhaps not be on the violence itself, but the writers and the readers. Quoting from Hannah in the article, "There is no life-changing experience that we should be discouraged from writing and reading about. Brutality is not the same thing as writing about brutality. After suffering a trauma, some people find it consoling and empowering to read or write about fictional characters who have survived similar experiences. If we can't stop human beings from viciously harming one another, we need to be able to write stories in which that harm is subjected to psychological or moral scrutiny and punished. On some occasions, perhaps the fictional perpetrator will go unpunished if the author is writing about the failure of the legal system to deliver justice. There is no life-changing experience that we should be discouraged from writing and reading about." So, panel, what are your thoughts about the potential effect this prize or similar endeavors might have? Do you agree with such, or disagree with such a progressive attempt to solicit stories that don't have violence towards women? Do you think this is a good feminist exploit or not?
Well, Claire and I were talking about this before the podcast, and we both went and read an interview with the creator of the Staunch Prize. And I think what's interesting is that I do agree with what the author of this specific article that we'll link to in the show notes is saying, that in no way would I say that we should rid all literature of instances or examples of violence against women, because as she mentions, there are some women and men as well who have experienced trauma in one form or another and find a sense of resilience or a path towards recovery in seeing experiences shared through characters, and they can find recovery through those experiences. So in no way would I want to remove that. But I do think that having read the author's point of view and why she created this award and this prize is simply that she feels the exact same way. She in no way wants to rid literature of these examples, but she does want to applaud and encourage and further some forms of literature that don't have it at all, that for those people who it may be too traumatic or triggering to read thrillers that depict that violence. She wants those readers to have an opportunity to read thrillers devoid of that. So I think it may have been a little more helpful to have some of the award creators' thoughts embedded within the article, because I think it was a bit misleading, because I think that there are points to both sides.
And I mentioned in our discussion that this is one of those rare times when I read two sides, what's supposedly two sides of an argument, and I actually agreed with everything said by both sides. And I think the issue of why it's one of those times where people are arguing a point, but they really agree with each other.
Exactly.
Because I don't think they're hitting on what the actual purpose of the prize is.
Yes, exactly.
And I would bring up, kind of a parallel. Let's say we can bring up the video gaming industry. I think the Staunch Prize is it would be nice if we could have a similar prize in the video gaming industry, where we award game developers who would actually create, for once, a video game that isn't based on meaningless violence to a woman, which only exists in a story to serve the random story and plot narrative of some male protagonist to work through. And I think that's what the Staunch Prize is getting at, we're not trying to say that there should never be an exploration of graphic, brutal violence against women. absolutely we should explore that. But it should be meaningful. What she's trying to say is we have an overwhelming trope of meaningless violence towards women, solely in the service of a male-centric storyline, that we need to acknowledge that trope exists in all forms of pop culture, and we need to start having some meaningless violence towards men. I'm sorry.
I totally agree. I read the same interview before I came. And basically, this article, the woman who disagrees with what the prize is trying to do, talks about how all different kinds of forms, prizes have their own
value in a way.
No. How they have their own requirements.
Sure.
To enter. And she said, "But this is different." And I'm like, "No, it isn't. It's not any different at all."
Exactly.
And she even when I first read this, I disagreed. That's why I went to read the interview and stuff, because I wanted to see, was there something I was missing? I think it's refreshing, to be able to know that there are books out there that are thrillers that don't have violence against women. I'm coming from, a comic book company that is trying to write women-friendly comics. And I don't want somebody, I have a woman who's a combat medic who's suffering from PTSD, awful things that happened to her during the war. But it's not any different than what would have happened to a man during the war. And, I think that people, I'm constantly having people come up at booths at conventions, especially men, saying we're looking for something for our teenage daughter who has a strong female protagonist and doesn't have a lot of violence against women. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Not at all.
Yeah. Well, and I think the point that the founder of the prize makes is important, because she does point out that there is a problem with some of the violence and the way it's depicted. Her quote is that there are so many books in which women are raped and murdered for an investigator or hero to show off his skills.
Correct.
If that's the only point for that violence to be there, then it shouldn't be that the preponderance of that violence is violence towards women, always.
I would agree with that. And I feel like hearing what you all three have to say about this, and I have not had a chance to read the interview with the creator of the prize, I do think that there's a worthwhile amount of time that needs to be spent looking at both sides of this argument. I will say that where I, as a writer and, as a creator, feel a little iffy on this is, I don't think that this shouldn't exist. I don't think people should talk negatively about this idea of trying to fight this trope. I do get stuck in a conundrum when I start thinking about, does this help the problem? Does the fact that, given the reality of the fact that a huge amount of violence is done to women in our real world, is it better for us to consider progressive stories as the ones that examine this in a worthwhile manner, or is it better for that subject to be removed?
Here's what I'll say, and I think based on what you're saying, that I really think it's problematic of the framing of this theme through the article that we provide in the show notes. I really think it does a disservice to this prize and this award, because that's not what's
that might not what be the prize is about, but what we have seen, at least in my own experience, what I've seen curating these stories for this podcast over the last few years, examining the culture of comics, there is a problem with audiences, not the individual putting together the contest, but audiences going for very simplistic black and white rules of what is acceptable and what is not. And some people will read into...
Sure, but I think we would be doing a disservice if we were to label that on this person who created this award. Because
I'm not trying
look, I always said this with television because I worked on Touched by an Angel, and people were just like, oh, I got so much out of that episode or whatever. And it's like, that's great, but I wrote it for entertainment.
Sure.
It's entertainment. And, sometimes I want my entertainment. I won't go to war movies anymore because it's just too heartbreaking. It's just too hard on me. Does that mean that I'm closing my eyes against the realities of war? No, I just don't choose to have that as part of my entertainment.
Sure. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I don't think that either, and maybe you can correct me if any of you feel wrong. I don't think either side of these arguments is arguing that the other shouldn't exist, that there should go away that storytelling that deals with violence against women or storytelling that doesn't. I guess the analogy where I, and I would love to hear a response to this analogy where I get stuck is if we're battling the trope, that is a positive thing in my way. That's pointing out a problem and a repetitive action that is fueling certain problems within our culture. If we're getting into a place where we think that this violence in fiction perpetuates further violence in reality, I don't know how I accept that as a fan of fiction without accepting that applies to things across the board. Yeah, then it becomes a thing of like, well, then doesn't violence in fiction in general, which we also, I would say, a trope is ridiculous amounts of violence in our fiction.
True.
Is that damaging to the individuals that are reading it as well?
And I don't know that we can look to anything like this in terms of solving larger social issues.
Right.
Pointing a light on it.
But I do find value in, I think, two parts of it, where you're giving one particular platform to a group saying, hey, we're trying to just call out the fact that in particular genres and mediums.
This is used over and over
again. Video
again.
game industry, et cetera, that this is a cookie cutter plot device.
It's a lazy writing.
A lazy cookie cutter plot device that we should, by way of a purposeful writing exercise, give people the opportunity to say, oh, nope, let's put some limits on it and create something different. Let's think, okay, do I need violence at the beginning of this thriller in order to propel my protagonist? Does it have to be a woman being, brutally whatevered?
Right.
No, it doesn't necessarily.
Right, of course.
So we'll, let's push people to be a bit more creative.
Right.
So in terms of it helping, okay, listen to us. The whole thing about having the prize has started this conversation.
Sure.
And it's going to start a lot of conversations because of the controversy back and forth. So I would say, sure, it is helping the situation, not because it's, the books that are going to be entered in it, but because the prize itself is starting the conversation around this.
And I would say, this kind of reminds me of, like, the Bechdel test, where it's not the solution, but it's the start of a, like, just because...
It's pointing out the symptoms of the larger problem.
And it's not necessarily a perfect litmus test for how women are portrayed, but just in which ways, and it's at least the start of, like you said, a conversation.
It's like filters you buy for a camera lens. It's one more filter to stick on your camera lens so that when you're looking at the wider world, you go, oh yeah, there's that problem out there, and maybe we should pay attention to it periodically.
Yeah. And that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, that it's going to affect different people in different ways, and we want to be mindful and respectful of that, but that we can be mindful and grow and learn from experiences like this.
Which is,
just that, by being mindful of this perspective that, there are readers out there who want to experience thrillers from a storytelling point that does not have violence against women.
Of course.
That's completely understandable and respectful.
So I will just recommend that you go watch the John Wick series, which starts off with gratuitous violence against a dog, not a woman. So there we go.
I love John Wick series, but I never watched that movie from the beginning because I do not watch movies where the dog dies.
I know, it's very hard.
I have walked out of movies where the dog is killed.
Do not watch Old Yeller.
Okay, I read that book.
Yeah. anyway, so that brings that story to a close, and we'll be back right after this.
Hey listeners, this is Drew Siragusa from Fanbase Press. I'm here to let you know that in addition to our podcasts and website, Fanbase Press is also a publisher of comic books, graphic novels, and other fine media. I also wanted to let you know about one of our exciting graphic novels that will thrill and chill horror fans everywhere. Identity Thief is an unnerving, skin-crawling tale featuring a terrifying and original creature that ComicsForge.com states is just downright wickedly well done. When Daphne and Craig move into a new apartment, they have every reason to believe that they have left their troubled past behind. Everything seems perfect, but after the discovery of a mysterious hatch in his closet, Craig begins to realize that something disturbingly inhuman is seeking a way into his home, desperate to enter his life in the most intimate and unsettling way possible. BuyIndieComics.com says, Identity Thief is sexy, frightening, claustrophobic, and oh so creepy. ComicBook.com called Identity Thief a chilling modern-day horror story. Perfect for fans of The Twilight Zone, Tales from the Crypt, or even obscure 80s horror anthologies like Tales from the Dark Side. Help support the giveaways, podcasts, and other free content we provide every day here at Fanbase Press by purchasing a copy of Identity Thief, or one of our other awesome graphic novels at the Fanbase online store today. Visit fanbasepress.com today and click on the store link to secure the ultimate in indie graphic novel horror.
Debbie, before we sign off for this week, are there any updates that you would like to share with our listeners about Kymera, and where can we find you?
Okay, we do have a website, KymeraPress.com. It's a little out of date at the moment. But if anybody's interested in any issues or anything like that, you can always email me at Debbie Lynn Smith at Kymera, Kymera Press, Press.com, and the website is spelled the same way. And you can always go to my website, DLynnSmith.com.
And you're very active on Facebook and Twitter as well.
Yeah, that's Facebook. There's a Kymera Press page. On Twitter, it's Kymera Press, and Instagram as well, Kymera Press. And then we are going to be at the Long Beach Expo.
Yes.
Yeah, in this month.
Yes.
Coming up.
And then we're going to be at C2E2.
Wonderful.
In Chicago in April. We have a booth at San Diego Comic-Con.
Excellent.
So we will be at San Diego as well. So
fantastic.
Cool. And she's sitting right next to me in case you want to find her right now.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't air this live.
Time travelers. Again, I point you to the fact that I just finished Fringe, so there are people who could potentially time travel. So good.
Well, Bryant, Claire, and Drew, where can our listeners find you on social media? Claire, we'll start with you.
You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I am at Unexpected Hobby, which is also the name of my Etsy store, which you will find my geek-themed cross-stitch designs, which includes designs based on Y the Last Man and a couple of other titles. So yeah.
I quilt, but
Topical.
maybe
I have my
They're pretty
into my crafting.
They're pretty exciting designs that Claire has. Drew, what about you, sir?
At Fanbase Drew.
And Drew,
Yeah.
it's a new month. It's February.
Yeah.
It's been many
I posted
months.
today.
You did?
Yeah.
That's
about the
wonderful.
video.
That's great.
Yeah.
Is that your only? That the only post you've done since we were here
No,
last?
I still did them twice a month.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We applaud your efforts.
Thanks.
Drew. Thank
We're just going to take you at your word.
you. Bryant, where can our listeners find you?
On Twitter, I am at Comic Book Slayer, and on Instagram, I'm at Comic Book Sniffer.
And you can find me on Twitter at Barbra J. Dillon. You can find Fanbase Press on Twitter at Fanbase_Press. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, Libsyn, everything but MySpace. As Debbie mentioned, Fanbase Press will also be at Long Beach Comic Expo, so we look forward to seeing you there.
Yes.
Very much so.
That will be on February 17th and 18th. If you are tuning in this Monday, We are also posting our press release, which includes our where you will be able to find us, as well as the 3 panels that we will be presenting. So we'll have all of the information regarding our panels and where you can find us at Long Beach Comic Expo on the Fanbase Press website, so tune in there. In addition, we encourage you to stop by the Fanbase Press online store. You can purchase all of our comics and graphic novels, including the recently released Kinsey, which is now available in a collected trade paperback. All 15 issues are available.
Wow.
Very exciting. That wraps things up for the Season 3 premiere episode of the Fanbase Weekly. Thank you to Debbie for joining us. Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
Be sure to like us on Facebook and Twitter and subscribe to and rate the show on iTunes. Don't forget that you can also email us with your questions, comments, and all other geeky inquiries at thefanbaseweekly@gmail.com. And as a reminder, you can also call us now at 818-208-7379. In addition, we want to offer a special thanks to Adam Warrock for our podcast's theme song, as well as Fanbase Press staffer Sean Foster for each week's amazing new episode photo. Thank you for listening. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Fanbase Weekly. We will see you next week. This has been part of the Fanbase Press Podcast Network.